All right, looks like we have almost everyone for our second panel. So I'll go ahead and kick things off for this one. Again, we have some esteemed guests. It's going to be moderated by Lindsay Riebling, who heads up research for Revolt Media and TV. She's a VP of Insights and Strategy. We have Will Thomas on board, who heads brand partnerships for All Def, and he's also the founder of 3T Consulting. And we also have Melanie Acosta, who also works at All Def and leads brand partnerships and strategy efforts there. And we will have Tyel Hayes, who's the SVP and head of consumer insights for BET. So we have 3 out of 4 of the people I mentioned. So I'll let them hop in on video and introduce themselves, and I'll check in with Tyel and see if he can join us in a sec too.
Hi, I'll go first. Although I feel like you did a pretty good intro, Rohan. So, like he mentioned, I'm Lindsay. I run the Insights department at Revolt TV, which, if you haven't heard of Revolt, is Sean John Combs / Diddy / Brother Love's media network. And we focus 100% of the time on hip hop culture, as well as this year had pivoted into social justice culture as well. So I think perfect time to have this conversation. I'm going to try and go on mute when I'm not talking because, of course, of all days, my building decided to do construction today. So try to minimize that. But pitch it over to Will. You want to do a quick intro? You're on mute.
As always. But no, I was saying thank you, Rohan. Appreciate that, Lindsay. Happy to be here speaking with you guys today. My name is Will Thomas. I've worked in the digital media space for nearly a decade. I am a senior brand partnerships executive and founder of 3T Consulting. I primarily work with media publishers like All Def Media in a sales capacity. And All Def is actually the largest Black-owned video publisher on YouTube and Facebook, with roughly around 600 million monthly views, 13 million plus followers and subscribers. And my daily responsibilities generally include landscaping the market, looking for new advertiser prospects, driving revenue, as well as closing new business and reoccurring business. And I'll pass it over to Melanie.
Cool, thanks, Will. I also work for All Def. I oversee the execution of all our branded programs and the strategy side. I make sure that all our client relationships are exceeding expectations on an internal perspective of looking in and on an external perspective looking in. And thanks, Rohan, also for having me.
Awesome. So for everyone else who's I wish we could see everyone's faces too, but if anyone has thoughts, questions, anything, obviously feel free to run them through Rohan or pop them in the chat. But we had the pleasure, myself, Will, Melanie, and Tyel chatted earlier this week and had a really rich discussion on this topic. And so I think I want to jump in and just like go for it. Knowing we're like loosely 6 months out from the infamous Black Square post, right? Where a lot of companies and corporations on Blackout Tuesday decided to show their support for the Black community and all the social justice going on, stemming out of multiple situations with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, to post a Black Square on their social media and say, you know, I stand with you. And a lot of them came up with those generic kind of statements that said, you know, we stand with XYZ. How are you guys feeling, and what have you guys seen from your side about what's happened since then? I'm sure there's good things, there's bad things, there's watch outs. How are you feeling about how, from an industry, we've evolved since then?
I feel optimistic about it. I think this kind of opened up people's eyes of what has been going on in the past. And I think it showcased a lot of people that are out there. I think a lot of more diversity has been uplifted into the internal workplace. And I think a lot more people are willing to uplift diverse and underrepresented groups in the business place, and also for consumers taking them in mind. In terms of the Black Square, I think there are companies that have posted the Black Square, but of course it's always about the action items, right? What happens after the Black Square? Is it something internally, which is great to also do a mental check on their employees' healthcare, because we're constantly hit by the pavement of things happening in 2020? Is it looking into diverse efforts of making sure our underrepresented communities are being taken into the executive level, being part of the decision-making process. I think I hope, and I just want to be optimistic about it and see that this will be a great way of opening people's eyes and hoping that we move forward.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mel. Kind of piggybacking off of Melanie, I think it's great to see the initial, post by a lot of the brands in the space, recognizing and, showing awareness and acknowledging that there is a problem, in this country as it pertains to social justice, and them, I guess the brands backing that sort of notion. But, as Melanie mentioned, I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of follow through. And I think we really need to challenge brands, because one thing that we know that they're exceptional at is really putting together a strategic plan and seeing that through as it pertains to marketing. I think if they applied that same level of attention and detail to, their role in terms of social justice, I think that'll get us that much closer. But like I said, I think there are a lot of brands in the space right now who are doing an amazing job. The Nikes of the world, the Ben and Jerry's of the world, who've been kind of, participating in this fight for quite some time. And so, like I said, I'm optimistic. I see a lot of great things taking place, but I also see a lot of room for growth. And, there's a lot of different ways, brands and advertisers, can take those steps in terms of action items. And, it could be internally, it could be through who you're sourcing your paper products from. You could be sourcing some of those paper products from Black-owned companies, all the way down to who you're running your media with. You could be running with Black-owned media companies. You could be partnering with, companies like All Deaf or companies like Revolt that really have a strong presence with that community. So, yeah, that would be my take on it.
You brought up, well, both you guys brought up two things I want to touch on. One of them was the idea that I think a lot of times, because we're all either brand side or working internally at agencies and working on a lot of these initiatives from different sides, whether it's strategy, insights, execution, we forget a lot of times, especially at an executive level, that employees are consumers too. And there's been a huge conversation, right, about like the mental toll this year is taking on consumers and young people, aside from there being a pandemic, aside from social injustices, the election coming up, it's emotionally draining for consumers. But I think a lot of times there's like this weird thing that we don't consider ourselves part of that pool. And it's like, oh yeah, we have to do something for them. We have to focus on this. And we're so busy like keeping the train on tracks that we forget we're people too. And we're also going through this. And so I think you both touched on the idea of kind of thinking, remembering that your employees and your team and your staff are human too. And even though we talk about this as this like something that's happening outside our walls, that it's affecting all of us in the workplace, and taking the time to check on your team's mental health and how this is affecting each other. And that could be, in itself part of playing a role in how your company shows up in these issues. Is, are you taking the time to check on your staff and how they're dealing with all this? And, I know for Revolt in particular, when George Floyd, like when that moment happened, it was, everything came to a halt and everyone was excused from company meetings. You don't need to show up on video on Zoom, for the duration of the week. Let's all just make sure that as humans, we're connecting with one another. So I love that you brought that up. The second thing I'd love to get your guys' take on is when we talked about this idea of, we're so good at coming up with strategy and we're so good at executing. How have you guys, from an insights perspective, knowing that a lot of people on this call are in strategy roles and research roles, brand side marketers, how have you guys seen, or have you seen anything from your roles that you've helped kind of advise companies on with what's happening in culture? Is there any like insights you've come across? And I'll just share one anecdote from Revolt and then give you guys a second to think about that. Something for us we found very early on in the springtime was all young people were taking to social to kind of like get news updates and what's going on in the world. But then as summer came around, they wanted to take to social for like escapism. And they were like, okay, too much going on my feed. This is like stressing me out. I just need to feel happy. Give me some Fresh Prince reruns, or give me something that's going to like make me feel nostalgia and have happiness. And so we had to shift our content strategy based on our audience needs. So curious if you guys have seen anything like that happen over the last few months.
Yeah, no, I'll jump in there. I mean, going back to what you said previously, I definitely think, all companies should check on their employees and, after everything that happened with George Floyd, I personally normally don't take to LinkedIn in sort of a volatile state. But, I think one of those days after, because I was in Atlanta visiting my family, and there was quite a bit of protests and everything taking place. And it was just a bit overwhelming. Honestly, like, I had posted on my LinkedIn, it was like, wow, today's a really tough one. It's hard to open up my MacBook and go to work today. So I think it's great when companies do, give employees that minute to kind of just take a breather, and especially being, a Black male in this space. I kind of have a duality as it pertains to the whole situation, right? Like, this is something that within the Black community, we've been, going through and talking about amongst ourselves for a very long time. And now that, it's unfortunate that, the death of George Floyd and Breonna, accelerated these conversations. But on the flip side, I'm also excited that there is opportunity for change moving forward, and that we are having dialogues like this to kind of, move the needle, so to speak. So that was kind of touching on your last point, but the question you just rose, no, I think, working at All Def and representing them, for those who don't know, All Def has a really solid stance or hold on, urban culture, Black culture as it pertains to hip hop and comedy. So when you talk about escapism, now even during, protests and stuff, like, it was very heavy. So, what we do really well at All Def is create comedy content. And so whether it's, nostalgia reruns of, Fresh Prince, or just topical comedic relief, I think that's so important to just our own mental health, and just being able to kind of break away from, everything that's taking place right then and there. But then in the heat of the moment, I think specifically at All Def, we have a platform called All Def Nation, which is more of our, news outlet, where we cover a lot of social justice issues. And in those moments, instead of us doing a lot of the speaking, we were really trying to empower the voices of, some of the activists, attached to Black Lives Matter, and some of the other individuals from different organizations who are really moving the ball down the field. So we just wanted to use that platform to kind of amplify and empower those voices.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in real quick before, unless you want to weigh in, Melanie, but I think that's so crucial and key. And just as you're talking, some of the things I'm hearing is, I think a lot of brands think I need to be on the front lines. I need to be out there, supporting the protest, or have this strong stance. And I think a lot of times that can be a high barrier to entry for certain companies or certain individuals, where it feels lofty, or it feels like, ugh. And I think what you're touching on a lot here is, it doesn't have to look the same for everyone, right? And for All Def, maybe it's comedic relief. And for, Ben and Jerry's, you mentioned earlier, it looks very different versus a Nike. And so I think part of that is thinking through, as brands, as marketers, how can we authentically show up in a space where we already live? And so for All Def, that was comedy. How can we help rejuvenate, recharge, so that, because this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? It's not like social justice issues are going to just come to a halt tomorrow. This is going to be, unfortunately, an ongoing thing that we're all going to have to stay in the fight. And so I think thinking through your long-term strategy, and how do you show up as a brand, and maybe that is helping them to recharge, helping them to shut off a bit so that they can show up every day, is so important. I think that was a great point. So sorry, Melanie, just wanted to echo that.
No, I think I just echoing Will about the whole comic relief area with All Def. I think it's nice when we look at the comments of our videos, where we see from our fans about saying, oh man, I really needed this laugh today. I think that's kind of, it kind of also helps us know that we're doing our job right. We're helping people provide that type of escapism, giving them that laugh. And I think that's kind of what part of entertainment is about, and why we gravitate to entertainment so much, is just, we all need to just take that, breathe, and just have a good laugh. And when we do want to look into those certain outlets of what's going on in current events, similar to, as Will mentioned, we have something like All Def Nation for that specific area. So I think that it covers both tactics. And I think with brands, and also talking on what you were mentioning about functionality, is just, I think it also comes into company values, and what also makes it authentic. Because sometimes if a brand, I think it's great for brands to take a stance. It just has to be on a thoughtful, authentic way, not just coming from far left. And it's just, well, I love that you did that. Where did this come from? But it's a conversation with the audience, with the consumers. So it's kind of letting them know that they are there. And it could be even as subtle of saying somewhere in fine print, saying some of these proceeds go towards PPE proceeds for frontline workers or towards supporting Black communities. I think there's always ways to do it. It doesn't have to be as blatant, but there's always ways around it. And I think that we could always continue that conversation, especially as Gen Z is looking more into conscious consumer purchasing behaviors, where a lot of their life aspect is based off more on purpose and positive impacts from how they're looking on doing their career, their purchasing habits, their day-to-day life, and also being relevant with what's going on in society right now.
Definitely. And I'm curious, which maybe there is an answer, maybe there's not. It's okay, because this one's on the fly. Pop quiz. You guys specifically at All Deaf or other companies that you've worked with, I know, Will, you consult outside as well. Knowing that there are a lot of insights professionals on this call and self-proclaimed nerdy researchers like myself, how are you guys tapping into your consumers? How are you taking into account what they want, or do you have an internal community, or how are you guys making sure that you're taking in their preferences and elevating their voices?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we obviously have an internal, data and insights team, that influences everything from, the creative that we, incorporate into our content, the timing in which we upload our content, but we also are looking at, sentiment, right? Like I said, when us being, heavily comedy focused, the engagement, we did notice that a lot of the engagement did increase, during that period while there were protests. And we kind of had some internal meetings with like our comedy and programming team, whether or not, we wanted to really double down on the seriousness of the matter or really kind of lean into the comedic relief. And we did see through some of the insights that, engagement did kind of increase during that period. And that just proved that, the people were actually looking for that sort of escape. So that was one of the bits. And then, obviously partner with companies like Pilotly, who were able to get an even deeper level of insights that we're able to leverage moving forward. I mean, I think those are two ways that, in the past we've been able to pull some of those insights and leverage them moving forward. I don't know, Mel, you may have some other thoughts as well.
I mean, I would just want to also piggyback off of what you mentioned with Pilotly, is how we do work well with Pilotly in terms of understanding brand sentiment, audience retention, and even viewer feedback on certain points of our videos as well. So I think we're able to have a good temperature check and understanding of what really does resonate with our audiences and what really speaks to them well. We definitely would want to create content that is relevant, authentic, and also hearing our viewers' feedback.
It's always tricky, I think, especially when you're, and I'm sure everyone on this call can sympathize, when you are in insights and you're partnering with a creative team, because they're like, no, we know what we're doing. We're the experts here. And you're like, trying to marry consumer data with people who have a vision. So I always enjoy hearing how you master teetering those two worlds. But I think that brings a good point with when you bring on brands or partners, or, I know All Deaf partners with outside people all the time, just like we do at Revolt. And you have somebody who comes in on this topic in particular, right? I mean, we're talking about something that can be a bit scary for people to especially for brands who are maybe more functional or maybe haven't taken a stance on issues in the world in the past. And so when you have someone come in and they say, hey, I want to be part of this, I want to double down, I want our brand to be involved with the conversation, and then they do, and they see negative effects, right? Like, I mean, we all heard when Nike supported Colin Kaepernick that supposedly their stocks went down, or went crazy, but then they seem to swoop right back up. Probably me alone revived their stocks just buying everything online. When that happens, though, for you guys, when a brand comes in and wants to get part of this conversation and then sees negative effects and not, I'm using the term negative loosely because it's all part of the process. But when they don't get necessarily the results they wanted, they don't see an uptick in engagement or sentiment or any of those things, how do you coach them through that journey?
I think it's kind of taking similar of what you said, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So sometimes it takes time for people to digest these things. It takes time for people to even understand the impact of content in itself. Sometimes content drops and it goes viral. And sometimes it takes time for people to really think about it and really see what the message is and really thinking about the authenticity and the genuine at heart intention behind it. I think also working with us in general is that when we do think about content, we always go in a meeting, and when a concept comes up, we think about, is this staff? Is this, how is our audience going to feel about it? And when it comes to that healthy creative friction between insights and creative, it's almost kind of just reminding creative about the thought process of what goes behind of any certain pushbacks. Usually when we do add context to it about, well, you know, this is about audience retention. We need to focus on how can we make the creative have this really strong audience retention in up to this long form video. So I think it becomes a melding of a mindset at that point as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, oftentimes, me being on the sales side and usually, the outwardly facing, client facing, face of the brand or, talking to advertisers, I always kind of let them know, look, like you can't be everything to everyone, right? And we live in a very, very judgmental society now, especially with social media where, if you post a black square, you might get flamed. If you don't post it, you're gonna get flamed. So it's like, whatever you do with your content or your strategy, like there's gonna be some people that don't agree with it. There's gonna be some people that do agree with it. And I think that's why it's that much more important to really be sort of on the same page with the advertiser, along with like sort of our creative team to make sure that we're building something together that we're both proud of. And one of the things I always tell my clients is like, look, like we want to build a program that A, not only will like exceed your expectations, but then B, will also give us learnings on how we can better perform in the future. Going back to what you were referring to before about insights and leveraging sort of post-campaign data to drive future campaign strategy. I think it all depends on how you approach it, and then as that data starts to come in, then you can kind of learn from it and incorporate that moving forward. But yeah, like when it comes to like specifically branded entertainment with video, which is where me and Melanie and our team really focuses, we try not to guarantee catching lightning in a bottle, right? As it pertains to a viral video. There's been some pieces of content that we've done with brands that's hit 30 million views. Those are obviously gold standard, but we're also very clear with them, like, look, like it's hard to guarantee that, but there's other things that we can guarantee throughout the partnership. Like, look, your voice is going to be relevant. The piece of content that we create is going to be authentic, and we know it'll resonate, and it'll be something that both parties are proud of and something that we can build on moving forward.
I think this brings up a really interesting discussion that we started to get into a little bit on Tuesday, but the idea that should everyone be taking a stance? I know I mentioned to you guys a few years ago, I did this huge study for a large telco network that I won't unveil right now. But a lot of it, and again, this was 2 years ago, before this year's 2020. And a lot of the feedback from young people was, I don't care. It's my cell phone provider. It's my internet provider. I really don't care their stance on the world. Like, just give me good service and do your job and then shut up. Basically, it was the overall sentiment was like, just make my phone work. I do think that has now evolved as people start to dig into more. I think my personal kind of take on it is, if you're a functional brand, at the very bare minimum, you better not be going against culture and against, I think there's a neutral space people can play in. But I think that now we've gotten to a point, especially with the younger generation, where there is an expectation of, no matter how functional you are or how minimal your contribution to my life is, you should say something, especially when we're talking about a global issue like what we've seen unfold this year. So curious kind of your guys' take on, are there brands or people or individuals that shouldn't take a stand?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in real quick. I think, consumers, particularly millennials and, Gen Z, I think they really want to see brands living their values, right? So for these brands that are making a stance, they want to see, these brands actually have a follow through and action plan to deliver on some of the things that, they're standing by. And I think with that, generates credibility, builds, consumer confidence, long-term loyalty. Those are some of the things I think, brands can gain by doing this, sort of like the right way, so to speak. But I do kind of, I guess, see where you're coming from, Lindsay, in terms of if you're a functional brand, let's say you're, a glass brand, you just provide glass that gets installed in apartments and whatnot. You may not have, a very social voice, or, emit a very social presence on, some of the social justice issues that are taking place. But if that's the case, that's okay. But I definitely think companies should make sure they look internally to make sure that the employees that happen to be of color that work at those companies feel like their company supports them, right? But the companies that are very, consumer driven, the Nikes, the Patagonias of the world, I think those types of brands, I think is very, very important for their business as well as just, overall, social corporate responsibility to have a stance and stand by it.
Yeah, I definitely think there's like some sort of spectrum or scale, which is sort of what you're alluding to too, where like, if there's a brand that represents me and who I am, like, I'll just talk personally. Like for me, when I identify with brands, I'm like Nike all day, right? Like I feel this attachment. My cell provider for me is Verizon. Would I define myself as like, I'm a Verizon person? Like probably not. So on that spectrum of like values and expectations for me, the consumer focused brands are much higher. And I think we've seen that. And I think actually, Melanie, you worded this very beautifully when we spoke earlier, which was, and I wrote it down because it was so good. They might not need to show up, but they aren't excused, which I think is so spot on, right? It's like where your brand or you're at is on this spectrum, you still don't get excused from the conversation. And maybe part of it is, to your point, Will, talking about it internally or helping your employees with their mental health and making sure they're recharged so that they can play a role in this fight.
Right, right. And like I said earlier, like there's things internally that they can do to, empower, whether it be Black-owned entrepreneurs, Black-owned partners. I think we're seeing it, even at All Def recently, advertisers are coming to us saying, hey, we want to reach a, Black audience, 18 to 34. We want to reach them through video. And then we also want to partner with a Black-owned media company to distribute the media. So, we're seeing brands are not only making the press statements and, making the announcements of donations, but I think they're also looking for other ways where, they can really impact the community in ways like that. So.
Yeah, I think, I'm as trying to be as optimistic a person as I can be too, but I definitely think we did see some brands issue a press statement or the black box. And especially with this generation, young people can sniff out marketing bullshit, right? Like, when it's just somebody kind of pandering to like, oh yeah, we're part of that too. And then nothing evolves out of it. So I do think now that we are 6 months down the line, you are starting to see, the people who are really dedicated, who are really in it for the marathon are definitely rising to the top. So I think this is a great time to be having this conversation because I think we're right at that flux where are you really part of this movement or are you just putting it on your social media and not following through? And so I think it's a great conversation to be having. And something Tyel mentioned, he's not here, but I definitely want to make sure his voice is honored because he offered so much to our conversation on Tuesday when we connected. Something he brought up that I'm also very personally passionate about, specifically for the insights community and anyone who's on this call who does research, marketing, strategy, is the idea of stopping siloing everyone by race, right? For whatever reason, historically in marketing forever, we have put people into boxes and I'm going to market to people, Black people, 18 to 34, and I'm just going to lump them all together and I'm going to ship this thing out and it's going to go to all Black people. And it's like, well, what is your actual goal? What is your outcome? Why aren't you looking at their behaviors and their mindsets and their attitude? Because what are you really trying to accomplish here? And so curious if you guys have any like tales from the field of situations like this where you've had to kind of help break down that barrier of assuming one entire race is homogenous and all is just the same.
Yeah, definitely. I think it comes to more about context. I think we're going to see more of an increase in contextual targeting and what is being representative of whose people's culture identify with. Um, I've been asked that question in terms of how can we hit the specific ethnicity? I'm like, well, you can't really target someone by their ethnicity, but we have to also think about consumer behaviors. We have to think about cultural relevancy and also making sure that how are they reaching them in the authentic way possible? What content is out there that is genuine and that really resonates with the audience that they want to hit? So I think that's one of the things that when talking to marketers, it's about, well, we represent the organic context of what resonates with the current culture and relevancy at this moment. So that's kind of how it's been in those kind of type of conversations so far.
Will, did you want to add anything on there?
No, I think Mel nailed it.
Yeah, I'll share from, I mean, just internally at Revolt, right? A lot of times we have people coming to us and using like random terms like, oh, we're going to target the urban community and we want to, and it's always this game of trying to figure out like, what are you actually saying? Like, what are you really trying to do here? What is your objective? And so I love kind of, I hope your prediction is right, Melanie, that idea of contextual marketing is going to start increasing. It's something that I and many peers I know have been actively trying to fight on our own, is doing more behavioral targeting. And, you know, if you're trying to drive people to go see this certain movie or this TV show, let's talk about the mindset you're trying to attack. And so I hope that your prediction rings true, and hopefully we can make this a movement that trickles on throughout. But also wanted to leave time for Q&A because I know we are getting close to our time here. So I just want to touch base with Rohan and see if there's any questions or quick gut check-in with him.
Cool. So we didn't have any questions come in besides the one that I think you saw and already addressed in real time. But I will, again, send that question back out to the attendees. If there's any burning questions that you guys have for Lindsay, Melanie, and Will, let us know. You can just pop them into the Q&A section or type it out in the chat.
Well, I don't think I can see the Q&A, so I'll rely on you for that, Rohan, but we can see the chat
Cool.
here if anyone chimes in. I'm just curious, if we're waiting for people to chime in there, did you guys see anything, well, you either brands you work with, Will, or in-house at All Def, was there anything that they've been doing for employees to kind of get some relief during this time?
I mean, internally, you know, I think, you know, obviously, you know, during the peak of everything, you know, back in the summer, you know, we were at All Def, you know, they were offering us, you know, days where, you know, if we didn't want to hop on Zoom, or, you know, if we just needed personal days, like, you know, that was, you know, something that was, you know, expressed to us. And, you know, I've talked to a handful of brands. Again, like I said, conversations have definitely skyrocketed with advertisers wanting to partner with us for various reasons. And, you know, a handful of those conversations, you know, a lot of these brands, they're implementing a lot of those same, you know, I guess statuses internally as it pertains to their employees, you know, time off, you know, for whatever reason, no questions asked. And I think it's one thing we haven't really talked about on this call is just like the impact of COVID on us while all this is taking place. So I think it's just been, you know, a very challenging time for a lot of people, like mentally, as they're going through all of this. And like I said, even with me, like, you know, when everything came out about, you know, George Floyd, there was just days where I just didn't want to work. Like I wasn't, you know, burnt out in a sense of, you know, not wanting to work, but it was just kind of overwhelming, you know, because then, you know, people are reaching out, hey, like, what can I do to support you? And I'm like, man, this should have happened a long time ago. It's just, you know, sometimes it's frustrating that like the chain of events is what like kind of accelerate the dialogue. But yeah, no, I think, like I said, I'm optimistic about, you know, where we are moving forward and some of the work that I've seen with, you know, brands in the space and really trying to, you know, not just talk about it, but also be about it.
I think you said it earlier as well. It's like a discussion that a lot of us have been having for a long time. And so there's part of it that feels like society is just caught up, or mainstream society is just caught up, and it can be a bit frustrating because you're like, hello, duh. But the flip side of that is, okay, we're now finally able to discuss it on a public platform, and brands are able to play a role in this space, which is exciting because before this year, we didn't see that happening as much. I do see one question came in that Rohan had put in here. So the question is, do you think there's a future in new metrics specifically related to inclusion? Today, there is a standard Nielsen metric people can buy against. Could there be a different metric that people can buy against that has some representation of the audience in mind? And I think, Melanie, you started to allude to this earlier. I've been trying to break down the demographic ethnicity role for a long time, and hoping that people do it more attitudinal, behavioral based. And, you know, again, if you're trying to drive someone into theaters for a movie, what is the mindset? What is the attitude that you're trying to attract? Is it a comedy genre? Is it a rom-com? Like, what is that you're trying to? And then we can target people based on the mindset they want to be in for your product or tool or whatever it is. That's my hope, because I know for, you know, you're talking about Nielsen, Kantar, you're talking about even MailChimp, that there are these silos that group people in, and again, we could have a whole conversation on AI biases and all that as well, because it's like, who made this group? A human ultimately had to make this subset and say, okay, here, we're going to filter all these people who are 34 to 50 years old and Hispanic, and boom, we're going to end. So, you know, there's biases that go into all of these things as well, which is concerning. But my hope is that as we evolved, it's more attitudinal and behavioral based we're filtering on. What about you guys?
Yeah, definitely. I think even so, when working with partners, it's just sometimes it's kind of, oh, you're a comedy. We only have a comedy movie, but also it's not that we also like other entertainment. We also are entertainment consumers. So there's always that type of siloing, even in general too, sometimes in terms of what is being seen is just, we're all entertainment consumers, where we represent entertainment in that realm. In terms of the metrics, just also double downing in what you were saying, Lindsay, is just there could be some type of bias, because once an algorithm could be set, it's kind of off to its own races in a way. Whereas also with new privacy concerns, I think that's even where we'll even see even higher contextual targeting getting increased as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'll take the second question, which was, what do you expect or plan for 2021 from a marketing standpoint? I mean, I think as it pertains to this conversation, we're going to really find out which advertisers, you know, are, you know, keeping to their word instead of, you know, just being topical when it makes sense, when everybody's, you know, talking about certain issues. And then we're going to see the brands that actually, you know, really want to do the work and build long-term partnerships and, you know, try to figure out ways they can really impact the community. And like I said, you know, a lot of our conversations today, you know, a lot of brands are saying, hey, we wanted to have a moment, you know, during that moment, let people know where we stood. You know, since then, we've been putting together a plan, and now we want to really implement that plan from not just 2021, but just moving forward. And so that's where, you know, I think there's going to be a lot more activity as it pertains to like social justice with brands. And, you know, I think it's even that much more impactful, and it resonates that much more, I feel like, with consumers when it's not, you know, on the front page of the newspaper or, you know, on the headlines of Fox, CNN, MSNBC, or what have you. So, you know, that's what I think. And then, you know, going back to like just brands in general, you know, I think while a lot of people sort of really respect, you know, the Nikes of the world or even the Ben and Jerry's of the world, is, you know, they've had this position for quite some time, right? When Colin Kaepernick came out and was, you know, kneeling, a lot of brands that are talking about social justice now didn't really have anything to say back then. And then I think consumers are smart, they're savvy, they know that, okay, that was a real moment where you can kind of, you know, really double down on how you feel about these issues. And then, you know, when everybody's doing it, I think consumers can kind of sniff out that people might just be jumping on the particular wave at that moment. So as we move into 2021, you know, into 2022, I think, consumers are going to be looking for brands to continue that messaging.
I think that's actually a beautiful note to wrap on, which is a lot of brands, I think, approach this Q1, Q2 of this year as a campaign, right? Like, oh yeah, we should do that thing. We should have a say. And I think the reality is this is not a campaign for one quarter of your business. This is part of your brand ethos from now until infinity. And that's how all of us should be thinking about this. This isn't just something that's happening in 2020. This is something that is forever, and all of us should be incorporating that into our day-to-day life, whether you're a person or brand. So I think that's a lovely note to end on. Unless you guys have any other gems you want to sprinkle, I think this has been such a beneficial conversation, even just for us three. I love having these conversations. I think, Will, you said it earlier, it's like us being able to discuss this stuff openly finally, and having a reason to assemble together and talk about some of these tricky subjects is beautiful, that we're able to even share. So if anyone who's on has follow-up questions or wants to contact us, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so feel free to add me there. Will, Melanie, I found you guys pretty easy on LinkedIn too, so.
Yeah. Oh, go out and vote. Everybody vote. If you haven't voted yet, vote.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh my gosh, yes. If you haven't already, thank God for early voting in California and being able to drop off your ballot. So that's an even better note to end on. Vote. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. I know there were still a couple questions trickling in. Like Lindsay said, you can feel free to, contact them directly with some of your questions. I know all of these guys personally, and they are very wonderful individuals, and I encourage you to have conversations with all of them. So thanks again for being part of this panel. A whole lot to think about after this one and the one before as well. So you're going to get my brain working for the rest of the day, and I hope everyone else is as well. There was the fun part of this meeting, which is to figure out who won this $100 Amazon gift card. And it looks like the winner is going to be Carolyn Bisson. I hope I'm saying your last name right. If you're still on this meeting, feel free to shoot an email to inquiry@pilot.ly or rohan@pilot.ly, and we can figure out how to get you your gift card. Cool. Thanks again, everyone.
Bye.
Later. Thank you.